الصورة العاشرة أن يروى الحديث مرفوعا من وجه وموقوف من وجه. أي وجه مخالفة right. كحديث أبي فروة يزيد بن محمد حدثنا أبي عن أبيه عن الأعمش عن أبي سفيان عن جابر. I don't know which Abu Sufyan this is. عن جابر مرفوعا من ضحك في صلاته يعيد الصلاة. Didn't we do this hadith? I'm not sure if we did this. Anyway, we just read it anyway. Oh, yeah, we did because it's very short. Um, anyway, it's okay. We'll just repeat it. من ضحك في صلاته يعيد الصلاة ولا يعيد الوضوء. وعلته ما أسند وكيع عن الأعمش عن أبي سفيان قال سئل جابر فذكره. Right, so I this narrated in two ways. One way is quoting the Prophet ﷺ, one way quoting Jabir. قال الحاكم الجنس العاشر من علل الحديث أخبرنا أحمد بن علي بن الحسن المقري أكبي المقري المقري والمقري I don't know who this is. قال حدثنا أبو فروة يزيد بن محمد بن يزيد بن سنان الرهاوي قال حدثنا أبي عن أبيه عن الأعمش عن أبي سفيان عن جابر عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال من ضحك في صلاته يعيد الصلاة ولا يعيد الوضوء. قال أبو عبد الله لهذا الحديث علة صحيحة أخبرنا. And when he says علة صحيحة, he means I have another chain of transmission that is sahih or stronger than this that exposes this illah, not illah صحيحة. Right? What he means is something that's exposing the illah. Right? لي رواية أخرى صحيحة تثبت علة هذا الحديث أو تظهر علة هذا الحديث. أخبرنا أبو الحسين علي بن عبد الرحمن السبيعي بالكوفة قال حدثنا إبراهيم ابن عبد الله العبسي قال حدثنا وكيع عن الأعمش عن أبي سفيان قال سئل جابر عن الرجل يضحك في الصلاة قال يعيد الصلاة ولا يعيد الوضوء. Right? So again, how do I know which one is right? The answer is one is stronger than the other. So this is the premise here. We keep seeing with Al-Hakim mentions there's this and there's this. So yeah, but there are one is stronger than the other. As opposed to, and this is a very important thing when hadith criticism, you say so-and-so is a thiqah, so-and-so is not a thiqah. That's fantastic. I don't want to know who is reliable, who's not reliable. I want to know who is more reliable when narrating from so-and-so than so-and-so. That's what's interesting. Because I'm now going to see this hadith narrated as the words of the Prophet from so-and-so, and as the words of Sahabi from so-and-so. And both of these people narrating from the same person. Which of these two people is stronger fi fulan? Right? So frequently you're going to see that question because there's going to be ikhtilaf. So-and-so narrates it one way, so-and-so narrates another way. Both of those are thiqas. But who is stronger from that person? Right? So this tells us as well that the whole issue of reliability, thiqa, is in reality what we call mutawati, right? It is mutawati or mushakkik. What's the word? Escapes me now. Which one is which, right? But the point is, it's when you say someone is reliable, it's like, well, I'm not really interested in are they reliable or not. I'm interested in how reliable are they to relate a hadith like this? And how reliable are they when somebody else narrates a similar hadith that goes against them, right? That's what I'm more interested in, right? So is this a good car or a bad car? That's not really a question. It's not binary, good or bad. It's how good is this car given the purpose that I need it for? Right? So you see, this hadith is sahih, meaning what? Like it's strong enough to go against the other evidence or not? Right? And sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. So I want to know how useful, how strong is this in respect to the thing that I'm using it for? Right? And notice you see that even with Quran, right? How strong is this? So this narration that the Prophet recited this verse, Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar, is sahih. But how strong is that when needed to establish the mushaf? Not strong enough. Goodbye. Right? He is a thiqah, but is he more of a thiqah than so-and-so to prove that what he's saying is reliable and the other person is not reliable? Right? So this is very important. Okay? Very, very important. Understand the mahiyya, what on earth are we actually talking about in hadith? قال أبو عبد الله فقد ذكرنا علل الحديث على 10 أجناس وبقيت أجناس لم نذكرها وإنما جعلتها مثالا لأحاديث كثيرة معلولة ليهتدي إليها المتبحر. This is the other thing in hadith. Hadith is fairly irrelevant لغير المتبحر, right? So you can get exposure to hadith, okay? But you can't do hadith if you don't do tabahhur, right? In contradistinction to nahu or fiqh or kalam. Fiqh, you can learn fairly well by studying 3 or 4 books of fiqh. So you study, for example, Risala, Khalil, what's before Khalil, something else, right? Awdah al-Masalik or something like that. I don't know, right? You study a few books, you get a quite good idea of fiqh, right? You're not a mufti, but you're pretty good, right? Because it's so well organized, and that you can kind of do quite a lot without that much tabahhur, right? You might not be amazing, you might have some misconceptions, but generally speaking, you're quite good, right? Because everything's kind of there for you. Nahu as well. I've never studied any of the mu'allaqat. I've never studied any of the old things. You just study Ajurumiyya, Qatrun Nada, Alfiya. You're pretty good at Nahu. You just study these late texts. I never read any primary text or anything. Doesn't matter. You can get pretty good at those things, right? Kalam as well. Study 2 books in Ashari or Maturid Aqidah. Great. You have all the concepts there, and it's pretty easy. It's not that difficult. Whereas hadith, it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. Like, it only works through becoming a maniac, right? That's the only way it works. You know, as one of my teachers said, you know, I have a problem. I have a financial and social problem, which is hadith. Like, I buy books that I can't afford, and I'm an antisocial. Like, I can't not research these things, and so I end up like having social problems, right? So it's basically a maniac, right? Because that's tabahhur, becoming the sea, right? So that's how it works. So I remember just, you know, with Sheikh Hamza Karam Ali, it's like in my 2nd class of hadith studies, he's asking me to research hadith. Like, why are you asking me to research? I don't know anything about hadith. What are you talking about? Because you can only learn through research, right? You can only learn hadith through digging up, through reading hadith books and digging up narrators and finding these things. That's the only way it works. There's no other way. There is no nice system, simple curriculum, right? That's why, for example, today in let's say universities in the Middle East, you're going to see, for example, that the way they teach fiqh is totally wrong, and the way they teach other things is totally wrong. But when they teach hadith is fine, because not the, yeah, I guess to some extent anyway, but like say the master's PhD system, where you just go and do some research and you don't really know and the teacher doesn't really know, but you're just doing research, it does actually work with hadith, right? It does actually work with hadith to some extent. And so the research done in hadith, for example, in the Middle East today is actually useful, whereas in fiqh it's not very useful half the time, because you don't know fiqh properly. You haven't studied one matan, right? You didn't study one matan properly. So let's say, for example, a normal BA in Sharia, you did not study any matan properly. You don't know what's going on. You don't know how Shafi fiqh works or Maliki fiqh or anything. You just know about fiqh in general, which is not very useful. And then you do your masters and you just like debate stuff that you don't even know what you're talking about. And the doctor doesn't even know what he's talking about either, right? And so it's just kind of like, it's just very flimsy and pointless, right? It's like somebody who just, you know, I just study comparative, you know, I wrote on the history of comparative martial arts. And it's like, well, do you know any of the martial arts? Like, no. It's kind of lame, just like somebody writing stuff. It's just merely interesting, that's all. They might say something interesting, that's all, but it's not ilmi. Whereas somebody who is a researcher in hadith, right? It's just the nature of it works, right? Similarly, using a search engine in hadith to some extent is logical, because you are looking for hits for certain words, right? And it does actually come up. Whereas for fiqh, it doesn't make sense, because I'm trying to find out, is this halal? Like, I can't type in, is this halal? There's a flow. I need to know this system. I need to know the books, know how the books work, what they're doing, and the flow of the discussion, right? And where they're going and who might touch upon it and where these things are going to be there and what something means and what something doesn't mean, right? It's a whole science. So it doesn't really work. So just doing like, oh, so a lot of fiqh, if it's not done by a specialist, it's just kind of stupid. It's just stupid. You know, it's just like, doesn't really make any sense. You don't know what you're talking about. Just be quiet. Whereas with hadith, you know, somebody like an atheist can kind of get into hadith and do something interesting. Can look at these things and talk about it, right? And there are certain modern atheists, or at least not non-Muslims, who do look at hadith and do say some things that are interesting, like Motsky and other people, right? They can kind of interact with it because it's fairly systematic, or it's something you can just research without being a total specialist. You learn it through digging into it, through tabahur, as opposed to fiqh, which is you don't. That's not how it works. Right? And if you haven't got proper training, then you're just kind of like random. That makes sense. So then we can say, in conclusion, there's pointless attending a class like this, or almost pointless. It's just obviously just barakah, attending a class like this if you're not going to go and buy these books, buy every book possible, and pull everything apart and find out what's going on here, going on there, and research this and research that and question, because that's just the nature of the science. That's how it works. Okay, and he says asbab al-illah, so he says asbab al-asli was asbab far'iyya. He says asbab al-asli al-wahm. He says قال أبو الحاكم النيسابوري or النيسابوري إنما يعلل الحديث من أوجه ليس للجرح فيها مدخل فإن حديث المجروح ساقط واهن وعلة الحديث يكثر في أحاديث الثقات أن يحدثوا بحديث له علة فيخفى عليهم علمه فيصير الحديث معلولا والحجة فيما عندنا الحفظ والفهم والمعرفة لا غير. Right? So he says when we say illah, right, he says yes, obviously in the introduction he mentioned that hadith can be ma'lul, or so-and-so narrates it and he's actually weak, right? But that's not the default. The default is when we're looking at an illah, we're saying it's reliable, but there's something off here. So when we say فَإِنَّ حَدِيث الْمَجْرُوحِ سَاقِطْ وَاهٍ أصلا, right? So we're not going to say this hadith, what's the illah in this hadith? That's not an illah. That the person is majruh to begin with. He's da'if to begin with. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is Malik narrates from so-and-so from so-and-so. It looks all fine. But they realize what's funny is you're reliable and Malik's reliable and the person above him is reliable, and the person above him is reliable, and the Prophet ﷺ, it all looks great. But they realize what's really odd here. How did you, among all the other people who studied the Imam Malik, quote this hadith? Oh, good point. So you're reliable. But isn't it super odd that nobody else quotes Imam Malik quoting this hadith? Or nobody else quotes this hadith in this way? Oh, good point. Right? So this is ma'lul, right? Or shudud, or whatever you want to call it. But it's not the issue of that you're not reliable to begin with. Right? And sometimes, yeah. So ولما كان شأن العلل الدقة والخفاء توقف المحدثون كثيرا عن التصريح بما يعل به الحديث إما لعدم استحضار عبارة يعبرون بها أو لعدم قابلية السامع أن يتفهم. قيل عبد الرحمن المهدي إنك تقول للشيء هذا صحيح وهذا لم يثبت فعمن تقول هذا؟ فقال أرأيت لو أتيت الناقد فأريته دراهمك فقال هذا جيد وهذا بهرج أكنت تسأل عمن ذلك أو تسلم الأمر؟ قال فهذا كذلك بطول المجالسة والمناظرة والخبرة. Right? So, and this is why Imam Muslim wrote his book, what's it called? Tamyiz. Because he's saying, a bunch of people are saying this is just made up. Like you just randomly choose this is sahih and this is da'if. And there's no dabit. He's saying no. So in the Tamyiz, inshallah, if you have time to read it, you'll see that he's just trying to show like this is not random. We have a system here, right? It's just quite difficult. قال ابن مهدي في معرفة علل الحديث إلهام لو قلت للعالم لعلل الحديث من أين قلت هذا لم يكن له حجة وكم من شخص لا يهتدي لذلك. Right? Well, and the same thing in fiqh, right? In fiqh, in principle, fiqh is just a conclusion of usul al-fiqh. So it should be a very simple system. We come along with raw logic and raw language. From that, we come to kalam. From kalam, with raw logic and language, we look at the primary sources and these things. We start adding the adillah shar'iyya, and then we get to fiqh. right? That's it. But in reality, it's not AI. Why is not AI? Because AI cannot answer questions that don't have answers or don't have objective answers. There are, again, so that's what the mention of the Imam Hanifa. He said, we could all debate with Imam Hanifa, but when it came to the exceptions, we couldn't. When it came to istihsan, right? We couldn't do that. We couldn't do what he's doing. There was a certain sixth sense, right? Which may be right or may be wrong, and that's why it's not so objective, but it may be right, may be wrong. And the same thing here. It's an issue of probability. We're not saying that that's why he can't express it. He said, this is more probable than this. Well, why? An expert doctor, right? I think we should do another check. Why? Like, show me the evidence. In the case he just has a hunch, right? So this is again the Sherlock Holmes versus Dr. Watson, right? Dr. Watson's looking at the general picture. So, well, this hadith looks sahih. I think the Prophet said it. And Dr. Sherlock Holmes says no. Because what about this? Good point, right? So it does. So Sherlock Holmes, unless the person actually confesses, is not necessarily right, but he's seeing things that other people don't see. And he says, والمقصود بهذا ما ذكرناه لا أن الحكم في العلل أمر مزاجي لا مسوغ له في لغة العلم. لذلك عقب السخاوي على قولة المهدي لم يكن له حجة بقوله يعني يعبر بها غالبا وإلا ففي نفسه حجج للقبول والرفض. وهذا دأب كل ذي اختصاص أن يحكم بممارسته كثير ما يغيب عنه التعبير عن المعنى الدقيق الذي في نفسه. وهذا كلمة أبي حاتم الرازي توضح ذلك حيث يقول مثل معرفة حديث كمثل فص ثمنه 100 دينار وآخر مثله على لونه ثمنه 10 دراهم. ومعرفة سبب طريق قوي لمعرفة المسبب. لذلك عني العلماء بمعرفة الأسباب ودراستها مثل علم أسباب النزول في التفسير وأسباب ورود الحديث وغير ذلك من العلوم. وكذلك معرفة أسباب العلة تساعد على كشفها وتفهم حقيقتها. وقد وجدنا للعلة أسبابا عديدة ترجع إلى أصل واحد نبحثه هنا ثم تتفرع إلى أسباب نتحدث عنها فيما بعد إن شاء الله تعالى. Right? So it mentions السبب الأصلي للعلة هو الوهم, that people make mistakes. وقد أشار إليه أمة الإصلاح في بحثهم في العلل واكتفوا به لأنه هو الأصل والوهم. Remind me next time inshallah الوهم والوهم. Inshallah we'll talk about this inshallah whenever we have time. صلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. سبحان الله وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك.